Hello, and welcome back to another Simcoe Muskoka Workforce Development Board webisode. I'm Susan Laycock, Executive Director, and we are joined by Labor Market Analyst and Consultant Tom Zizys. Welcome back, Tom.
Thank you.
Today, Tom is going to talk about the highlights of our local labor market plan for 2018 and 2019. Tom, I know you have a lot of information that you want to cover, so I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you. Hi. The local labor market plan is a document that each workforce development board across the province produces annually, and it looks at several different topics depending on the workforce planning board. In the case of this year's Simcoe Muskoka document, there are a number of items that we covered, and I'm going to just give you a kind of a table of contents to begin with. The first set of data is still looking at some of the 2016 census data. Even though the census is undertaken in 2016, the first data really only starts coming out around mid-2017. And the actual more complex tables where one does cross-tabulations on different topics really only start coming out in 2018. So in a way, this is essentially new data, and the items that we focused on this year were three in particular. One was place of work data. So where do residents work? Are they working at home? Are they working at a usual place of work? Or do they have a kind of job where they move from one workplace to another, say like a construction worker? So that's the place of work data. The second one is local jobs. So when we talk about employment, we're usually talking about numbers that reflect employment by residents. But Statistics Canada also has available the ability to look at not only where residents are employed, but where are those jobs, and then report the data on the basis of geography. So in essence, what we are able to show is what are the actual jobs that are physically present in each municipality. And so that's a really useful piece of data for anyone who's involved in the labor market. And we're able to provide that information not only in terms of Simcoe and Muskoka, but also for each of the municipalities in your area. So I think that's a very helpful piece of information for individuals who are involved in employment services, for example, and also for economic development offices. The third piece of data we looked at was school attendance data. So we can break down by age groups from 15 to 19 and from 20 to 24. We can talk about how many youth in those categories are currently, or in 2016, were attending school or not attending school, and those who were attending school, which level of schooling they're attending. And that's good information to know in terms of dropout rates, in terms of how many youth are continuing in education and what kind of education they're in, because that includes, we can break it down by males and females, and you'll find interesting information there about males, for example, are more likely to go into apprenticeship or college programs. Females are more likely to go into universities. And we can take that data and compare Simcoe and Muskoka to the rest of the province and Toronto. So that data is there. Then the second item that we have as part of the report is a survey that was done of employers. And so there are questions that are asked about their labor market challenges, and we list quite a few different responses that are also, a text is provided to analyze that information. And so that's a further part of that report. And then the last part is data we get from the Ministry of Training Colleges and Universities on Employment Ontario services. And what that has to do with is it is all the client data for the whole list of services that you see there on the slide. So employment services, literacy and basic skills, second career, apprenticeships, Canada-Ontario job grants, and the Youth Job Connection program. So there we present data on who the clients are, what some of their paths are in terms of programming services they may take, and also where it's available, some outcome data. So that's kind of the overview of the local labor market plan. And we wanted to, in this webisode, just give you a few illustrations of what some of this looks like. So I'm going to start with the local labor market data, and this was the local jobs data that I was talking about. So in this slide, here's an illustration of the kind of slide that we offer, and it shows on the first column the whole series of possible industries, and then for each jurisdiction it has a percentage breakdown. The top number is the total number of jobs in that jurisdiction, and then underneath is a percentage breakdown. And what we've done is we've kind of highlighted with the by shading in green those industries that have a higher percentage of jobs in that industry compared to the provincial average. And in that way, one can see already, just looking at different municipalities, that they have different profiles. On the slide we're looking at, for example, ESSA and Oro-Medonte have a higher proportion of jobs in agriculture. Innisfil has a very high proportion of jobs in retail trade. Collingwood and Barrie also a high proportion of jobs in retail trade. It's interesting that where there's a hospital, one sees a higher proportion of jobs in healthcare and social assistance. So Collingwood and Barrie also have higher numbers in that category. Ramara has a high proportion of jobs in accommodation, food services, and arts, entertainment, and recreation, partly having to do with its being close to the casino. ESSA has a large number of jobs in public administration. So a lot of variation, because these differences really get kind of washed out when they're averaged together and being displayed for Simcoe as a whole. In the next slide, similarly, another slide on Simcoe, because we list all the municipalities in Simcoe, which is a long list. You see as well, again, Wasaga Beach, high levels of jobs in retail trade, and Midland, of course, having a high number of jobs in manufacturing. So you can see the pattern of where these green shadings occur. There's quite a lot of variation in Simcoe. And just as a comparison, the next slide shows the figures for Muskoka. And there, interestingly enough, for most municipalities, there's actually a fair amount of consistency. The two industries in particular that really stand out are retail trade and accommodation and food services. But for example, construction, particularly in Muskoka Lakes, is huge because of the large cottage industry there. And also, I'm going to point out real estate and rental and leasing and administrative and support services, because that again involves industries that are servicing the cottage industry. The administrative and support services relates to services to buildings. It includes janitorial and cleaning services and landscaping services. So these would be a prominent industry in the cottage sector. So that's just a kind of a taste of the kind of data you can expect to see in the labor market planning report. The next part is the employer survey. I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of this survey. Again, these are taken from the slides, from the charts in the report. And this slide, first of all, just shows the number of respondents. So we had over 260 employers respond to this particular question. We're asking about their profile in terms of the size of the establishment, so the number of employees that are employed. So we have the actual number. We show the percentage that they make up of the survey respondents, and we compare that to the actual to the numbers that actually exist in Simcoe and Muskoka. And what's interesting is that in terms of the survey profile, when you look at the larger employers, those with 100 or more employees, around 16% of them responded to the survey. So a good representation from among those employers who have a lot of employees, which is what was important to us in terms of the survey, because we're asking about employment issues. And speaking of which, so on that next slide, we actually wanted to zero in on what were the reasons they were having difficulty in finding candidates for entry-level occupations. And on the left-hand side, we had listed a series of possible answers, and we asked them to rate them to what extent these issues were an issue or these concerns were an issue or not. And strikingly, we highlighted that those answers where the response, where the rating, the degree of importance was very high. We colored that in green, and those that were very low, we covered it in orange. And you can see from the chart, I'm not going to go through all the answers, that there's one issue that was of concern in every category of employer, and that was there simply were not enough job applicants. And other issues that sometimes have been raised in the past, particularly things like workers retiring, or even that job candidates seem to lack motivation, which sometimes would appear number one in surveys in the last couple of years, now fall by the wayside. And now employers are saying, we're really hurting. We actually just don't seem to get enough job candidates for the job openings we have. We then also went on to ask them to present them with some solutions, and we said, are these sometimes issues you might consider, but also are these perhaps things that you are already doing? And so just to illustrate in this slide, we asked them, for example, about would you consider providing workplace learning experiences? And 42%, so 4 out of 10 employers say we already do so. Whereas on some other issues, also high number who are already providing retention bonuses, which was really high, around over a third provide retention bonuses. And we also asked them, well, would this not be an issue for you? So you can also see from these slides both where there might be some room to give in terms of suggesting to employers some strategies in order to improve their chances of attracting and holding on to workers, and others areas where employers felt they didn't have much room to make those kinds of accommodations. Finally, in terms of the slides around the survey, we asked them to assess their own HR practices, and we gave them a series of HR practices, and we asked them, do you feel that your practices in this regard are either very good or satisfactory or need some improvement or a lot to improve? And we've listed these essentially in the order of the degree to which they felt there is need for some improvement. So on issues that are more remote from the labor market, for example, issues like helping their workers around transportation or commuting challenges, or helping them on relocating from outside the area, most companies say, no, that's not something we really do much of, and we could do more. But even in terms of some internal HR practices like conducting exit interviews. So exit interviews are if someone's leaving a firm, to have an interview to understand both why they might be leaving, are there issues that they had with the company. It's not something that all that many companies engage in. Around 20% say they think they do it very good, and around 30% say they're satisfactory. So only around half are in that kind of, we think we're okay in this realm. So again, some areas that particularly for those of you who work with employers, can give you some insights in terms of how they themselves see their own practices around how they engage with their own employees. So finally, I'm just going to make a very short comment about the Employment Ontario data, just to give an illustration of what it actually looks like. So for example, we have a slide here that presents the data for employment services assisted clients by the length of time they've been unemployed. So this is again data that we get from the ministry, and what we do is we use the same metrics as the data uses. So here it shows categories of length of unemployment by 3 months, under 3 months, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 12 months, over 12 months. We present the breakdown for the board area, so in this case Simcoe and Muskoka. We compare it to the region it's in, so we have some context, and we compare it to the provincial numbers. So we're not just throwing up the raw numbers, we're giving percentages so we see proportions, and we try to provide a context. We also typically show what the figures were for the year before, so we know if there's been some change, and we try and find some measure against which to judge these figures. So in this case, we show the length of time, similar length of time for everyone unemployed in Ontario. So we can see, is there something different about the clients that is separate from the general unemployed population? And in this case, what we see is that individuals who seek out services tend to have been unemployed for a longer period of time. Finally, in terms of slides, we show what has been the trend for length of unemployment in Ontario. And this slide shows how, at the time of the recession in 2008, the percentage of people unemployed rose significantly, and how it's been taking a very long time for that percentage to drop off. So that's what's in the labor market planning report. This can be downloaded from the website, as Susan said, and there's the cover page, and I hope you have a good read.
Well, thanks very much for presenting these highlights. And as Tom mentioned, you can go to the website. So the website is smwdb.com, and just click on the labor market information tab, and you'll be able to find the full report there. So there's lots more information and that Tom presented to you. So thanks again for joining us today, and be sure to watch for future announcements on future Simcoe Muskoka Workforce Development Board webisodes. Thanks again for joining us.